This is a textbook example of outdated triage protocols, exactly why dinosaurs like you endanger patient outcomes. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 14 minutes before Laura Bennett saved the life he'd condemned to death. Seattle General's night shift hums with fluorescent buzz and antiseptic sting. The air tastes like bleach and desperation at 3 in the morning. Laura Bennett, 47, moves through medication rounds with invisible precision, her hand steady despite the tremor that starts at her left wrist, a fine shake she hides by gripping charts firmly. She's worn scrubs for 18 years. Nobody here knows she wore combat fatigues for 23 before that. Nobody here knows she's Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett. They see a night shift nurse. They see a dinosaur, according to Dr. Caldwell. She checks room 347 first, though the schedule says last. Captain Marcus Hayes sits upright in bed, mute since the IED detonated in Tikrit 2 years and 4 months ago. His eyes track her with recognition she doesn't acknowledge. He clutches a tarnished challenge coin in his left hand, unit insignia worn smooth from 1,000 nervous rotations. The coin has a history. Laura has the same one in her left boot. She organizes her med cart with military corners, every vial aligned, every label facing forward. Muscle memory. Some things never leave you. Dr. Caldwell enters the floor at 0600 sharp, flanked by residents and attendings for grand rounds. 20 doctors. The number matters. Laura counts them without thinking, it's what operators do. She's sized up rooms her entire life. This one has 2 emergency exits, one blocked by the medication cart, and Caldwell positioned like he owns the place. He stops at Laura's station, picks up her patient chart for room 347, and smiles coldly. The smile is a weapon. Laura recognizes weapons. Let's discuss how not to practice medicine. His voice carries across the floor. Not raised. Worse. Measured. Staff, this is Nurse Bennett's care plan for Captain Hayes. Captain Marcus Hayes, 42-year-old male, mute since 2022, presenting with stable vitals. He holds the chart high, turning it toward the assembled doctors like Exhibit A in a murder trial. Notice the medication intervals. Notice the lack of aggressive monitoring. Notice the absence of protocol compliance. Laura's jaw doesn't move. Her hands don't shake. She continues organizing her cart. The tremor in her wrist transforms into stillness, pure will pressing it down. She's held lives together in fields under mortar fire. She can hold her face in front of 20 doctors who've never seen real stakes. She can be invisible. That's her job. Caldwell moves closer. In my tenure as Chief of Surgery, I've documented 43 cases of substandard nursing care causing patient deterioration. 43. Nurse Bennett represents exactly the kind of outdated thinking that costs us Joint Commission accreditation and, frankly, lives. He pauses. The room goes dead silent. Even the ventilators seem to quiet. The issue is generational. Dinosaurs don't adapt. They fossilize. And eventually, they become extinct. One of the residents, a third-year named Patterson, swallows hard. Another looks at his shoes. 2 others exchange glances. None of them have the spine to meet Laura's eyes. That's how she knows they're not military. In the field, you look your brothers in the eye even when command is stripping you of rank. These doctors look away. They're afraid of Caldwell more than they respect the truth. Laura slides a vial into her pocket without breaking her rhythm. Metoprolol. Hayes doesn't need it yet, but she's learned to think ahead. She's learned that chaos comes fast. She's learned that the only person you can trust in a crisis is the one who's already prepared for it. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like insects trapped in plastic. The sound makes her want to move, to act, to do something. But action right now is the enemy. Invisibility is the mission. The tremor in her wrist flares again, rage held down by discipline. She presses her fingers against the edge of the cart and breathes. For count-in. Hold. 6 count out. The seal breathing technique. Nobody recognizes it. They think she's just an old nurse managing anxiety. Caldwell dismisses the group 10 minutes later. The 20 doctors scatter like birds. He's satisfied. He got his audience. He got his humiliation on record in front of witnesses who will report to the hospital board if she files any complaints. He's strategic. She'll grant him that. He's not an idiot. He's a predator who's learned which prey to hunt. Laura files that assessment away. Predators have weaknesses. She knows how to find them. By the vending machines, 2 residents linger. Patterson and a woman named Chen. Patterson's voice carries down the hallway. She's been here how long? 18 years? And still working night shift? That tells you something. Chen laughs, the kind of laugh that sounds like breaking glass. Yeah. That tells you she's a dinosaur. That tells you she can't hack days or management. She's just stuck. Like a fossil in the wall. Laura walks past them. She doesn't change her pace. She doesn't acknowledge them. She doesn't grip her badge hard enough to crack the plastic. She is a ghost. Ghosts have perfect composure because ghosts don't exist to anyone around them. They move through spaces. They observe. They report. That's what a Navy intelligence operative does when she's embedded in a hospital watching a surgeon run a Medicare fraud scheme with Medicorp insurance. She is not Caldwell's target. She is his blind spot. Patterson sees her pass. His voice drops, but not enough. The scary part is she probably thinks she's still good. Still thinks she matters. Laura reaches the medication locker at the end of the hallway. She inputs her code. The lock clicks open with a precise mechanical sound, satisfying in a way nothing in this hospital has been since she arrived 3 weeks ago. She reaches for the cardiac medications. Propranolol. Amiodarone. The arsenal of keeping people alive. Caldwell appears beside her like a thought she didn't want to have. He smells like expensive cologne and confidence. His white coat is immaculate. Not a stain. Not a wrinkle. A man who doesn't work. A man who positions other people between himself and actual medicine. Nurse Bennett. Not a greeting. A statement of fact. His voice is soft now. More dangerous that way. You've been an asset to our team. Truly. But I've been discussing with HR the reality of our current staffing model. We're moving toward a more dynamic, younger team. Better adaptability. Better outcomes. Laura doesn't turn to face him. She continues organizing the medications. Each one placed with military precision. Alphabetical. Then by dosage. Then by frequency. Every task completed with absolute focus. It's a way of not reacting. It's a way of controlling what can be controlled. She's learned the difference between battles and wars. This is neither. This is gathering intelligence. What I'm saying is, there's going to be a transition period. Caldwell's voice drops lower. We'll need to manage it carefully. Professionally. Security escorts for terminated employees typically happen during shift change. Very publicly. Prevents awkwardness. Allows the rest of the team to see we're serious about our standards. It's a threat. It's a career execution notice dressed in administrative language. It's also information. She files it. She catalogs it. She knows exactly why he's pushing her out. She's been documenting his phantom billing codes for 3 weeks. Surgeries that didn't happen. Procedures with inflated costs. Medicorp insurance paying out 70% above the Medicare standard. It's a $10 million scheme, maybe more. And if she connects the final dots, Caldwell's entire operation collapses. That's why Naval Intelligence sent her here. That's why she took a nursing job. That's why she accepted invisibility. Caldwell waits for a response. Laura slides the final vial into place and closes the locker door. The lock clicks shut. She turns. She makes eye contact. Not deferential. Not challenging. Just present. Just watching. Just cataloguing. Her voice, when it comes, is perfectly level. "I understand, Doctor." She walks away before he can say more. She walks back to room 347. Captain Hayes is still awake, still gripping his challenge coin. She checks his vitals. Blood pressure 118/74. Heart rate steady at 62. Oxygen saturation 98%. He's stable. For now. But Hayes has no idea what's about to happen. He has no idea that the reason Caldwell called him a liability during grand rounds is because Hayes's medical records could expose the fraud. Higher acuity patient equals more billing opportunities. Caldwell's already tried to move him to a different ward twice. Laura blocked the transfers. She marked his condition as requires continuity of care with current nursing staff. She used Caldwell's own protocols against him. What she doesn't know yet is that Captain Marcus Hayes isn't just a patient. He isn't just the mute Special Forces officer who served in Tikrit. He commanded her son during that deployment. He was with her son the day the RPG hit their convoy. He was the last voice her son heard before he died. And now he's sitting in room 347, holding a challenge coin from their unit, and everything that's about to happen, the emergency, the exposure, the reckoning, starts in exactly 48 hours. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that Caldwell doesn't know who he's trying to destroy. He sees a dinosaur. He sees an old nurse he can discard like a used syringe. He doesn't see Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. He doesn't see the woman who extracted 12 wounded under fire in Tikrit. He doesn't see the operative who's been trained by naval intelligence to destroy men exactly like him. He doesn't know that every careful note she's taken, every phantom billing code she's documented, every Medicorp connection she's traced leads directly to his conviction. She sits in the break room at 0700 hours with a cup of coffee that tastes like metal and watches the sunrise through a window overlooking the parking lot. Rain hasn't come yet, but it's on the way. She can smell it on the air, that electric ozone scent that comes before the storm. She takes out her phone. It looks like any other phone. It's not. The encrypted line connects directly to a naval intelligence liaison in Coronado. She types 3 characters, Caldwell escalating. Termination threat imminent. The response comes back in 90 seconds, continue documenting. Do not break cover. You're 72 hours from closure. 72 hours. 3 days. That's how long she has to stay invisible. That's how long she has to accept being a dinosaur, a fossil, a woman on her way out. That's how long she has to do the thing she does better than anything else in the world, disappear while watching everything. Captain Hayes is sleeping now, his challenge coin resting on his chest. She watches him through the window of his room. He doesn't know she lost her son. He doesn't know that the deployment was hers too, that she was there in the field medical tent when they brought in the casualties. He doesn't know that she saved him because he was her son's commanding officer, because loyalty transcends death, because Master Chief Petty Officers don't leave their people. True class is what you do when the lights go out. And the lights are about to go out. Laura filed her charts with the same precision she'd used to prep field surgical kits under mortar fire in Tikrit, each notation exact, each vital sign logged in her careful handwriting, each medication cross-checked 3 times before administration. Her hands moved with mechanically steady purpose, fingers finding the chart tabs, the pen, the signature line, completing each entry as if the morning had been routine rather than a public execution. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and she focused on that sound, let it anchor her to the present moment, kept her breathing level and her jaw from betraying the white-hot precision of her anger. 20 doctors. That number sat in her chest like a blade. 20 physicians had stood silent while Caldwell dismantled her clinical judgment, had avoided her eyes like she carried something contagious, had scribbled notes on their own charts as if documentation mattered more than the message being delivered. She understood the dynamic perfectly. In military hierarchies, silence from subordinates was obedience. In hospitals, it was cowardice dressed as neutrality. What they didn't know was that Laura had commanded a forward surgical team of 8 medics under direct fire, had made triage decisions that saved 43 lives in a Tikrit Field hospital with nothing but a frayed reference manual and the kind of calm that only comes from accepting you might die before the sun goes down. She had held a young Marine's hand while his left leg ended at the knee, had looked him in the eye and promised him he'd walk again, and 3 years later he had. But none of that mattered here. Here she was just the dinosaur. The outdated nurse. The one who didn't understand that Medicare fraud was less important than maintaining professional hierarchies. Caldwell appeared behind her at 1,100 hours, his shadow falling across the medication locker like a predator's. She didn't turn. She logged her access with steady clicks on the keyboard, her password entered without hesitation, her movements deliberate and measured. He watched her the way a hawk watches a field mouse, not with hunger, but with the patient certainty that escape was impossible. The air between them grew thick enough to operate in, as Master Chief would have said back in the teams, though she'd never been in the teams. She'd walked the same terrain, made the same decisions, but her uniform had been medical scrubs instead of desert camouflage. That distinction mattered to people like Caldwell. Security escorts for terminated employees happen at shift change, he said, his voice the kind of smooth that preceded threats in every language Laura had ever heard. Very publicly. Just so you're aware of protocol. She closed the medication locker with a soft metallic click. No trembling. No flinch. No intake of breath that might suggest fear. She turned to face him with the expression of someone acknowledging that he'd commented on the weather. Understood, Doctor. He lingered for 3 seconds, long enough to establish dominance, short enough to maintain plausible deniability about the threat. Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor with the confidence of a man who believed his power was absolute. Laura stood motionless for 7 seconds after his departure, her left hand gripping the medication locker so tightly the white-knuckle tension threatened to split her skin. She forced the hand to release, to drop to her side, to breathe. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was the difference between acting on instinct and maintaining her cover as an ordinary nurse. Maintaining her cover. The phrase tasted like copper and ash. She was Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, and that identity had been earned through 23 years of service, 3 Purple Hearts, a Navy Cross that sat in a locked box in her apartment in a neighborhood of San Diego where nobody asked questions about scars or medication allergies or why she sometimes woke at 0300 screaming. But Laura Bennett the Master Chief didn't exist anymore in this hospital. She had been folded away with the precision of someone who understood that true power often meant becoming invisible. The naval intelligence handlers had approached her 18 months ago, 2 weeks after the unofficial discharge that had left her body intact but her field career in pieces. They'd laid out a file across a metal table in a nondescript building in Arlington. Medicare fraud. A network. A doctor named Caldwell who had been systematically overbilling for procedures, fabricating surgical outcomes, coordinating with a private insurance company to create phantom claims. The scope was $20 million. The victims were thousands. The political pressure to investigate had somehow never created actual consequences because Caldwell had friends, hospital board members, state medical licensing officials, insurance executives who owed him favors or owned pieces of his offshore accounts. They'd asked if she wanted to help. Not as a Master Chief. Not as a decorated officer. As a nurse. As someone invisible enough to observe, documented enough to testify, trusted enough to eventually access the evidence they needed. She'd said yes before they finished the briefing. The cover had been built carefully over 8 months, a resume from a private facility in Virginia, references from nursing schools and supervisors who were actually agency assets, a quiet reputation as competent but not exceptional, the kind of nurse who showed up on time and stayed late and never asked for recognition. The kind of nurse who would be easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss. Easy to use. The irony was that Caldwell had done her work for her. By publicly dismantling her credibility in front of 20 doctors, he had guaranteed that no one would believe her if she suddenly appeared with accusations. Which meant she could gather evidence without triggering defensive responses. The hospital would be too busy watching her fall to notice her documenting their complicity. At 1,400 hours, while filing post-operative reports, Laura noticed the irregularities that Naval Intelligence had been hunting for 8 months. Procedure codes that didn't match the actual surgical time. Implant serial numbers that had been used twice in different surgeries on different patients. Medicorp insurance appearing as the payer on cases that should have been covered by Medicare. The pattern was so obvious once you knew to look for it, like camouflage once you'd been trained to see through it. She photographed 3 charts with her personal phone, careful angles, steady hands, the kind of precision that made the images crystal clear and impossible to dismiss as error or coincidence. Her handler received the images by encrypted message at 1,430 hours. The response came back in 7 minutes, confirmed. Escalating to FBI field office. Maintain position. Do not engage. But maintaining position meant watching Caldwell make phone calls at 1,500 hours. For calls. She saw him through the window of his office, his face flushed, his jaw clenched, his finger stabbing at the phone as if the plastic had somehow offended him. The hospital board's finance chair. The chief medical officer. The state nursing board investigator. And someone else, someone whose name she didn't catch but whose presence made Caldwell's shoulders straighten with the relief of a man calling in markers, favors, debts owed. By 1,600 hours, her supervisor appeared at the nurse's station with the expression of someone who had been instructed to deliver bad news but couldn't quite look at the target. Dr. Caldwell has concerns about your clinical judgment, she said, her voice soft enough to be almost apologetic. You're being placed on peer review pending evaluation. Laura nodded once. Understood. She didn't ask what the concerns were. She didn't request copies of the accusation. She didn't ask for legal representation or demand to know Caldwell's specific allegations. She simply accepted the information with the quiet dignity of someone who had already calculated the outcome and decided it didn't matter because the mission was larger than her career. The mission had always been larger than her career. That was the real sacrifice. Not the public humiliation. Not the termination threat. Not the systematic destruction of her professional reputation in a city where she had no other identity, no other support system, no one to call who wouldn't already be compromised. The real sacrifice was keeping her hand steady while it happened. Keeping her voice level. Keeping her face blank as concrete while her entire cover collapsed in real time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part arrived at 1945 hours when she went to check on Captain Marcus Hayes in room 347, and found his neck veins distending like rope, his blood pressure dropping with the inevitability of gravity, his hand clutching the tarnished challenge coin from their ticket unit with the kind of desperation that meant he'd already figured out what was happening. He couldn't speak to tell her. The IED had stolen his voice 2 years ago. But his eyes said everything. His eyes said he was drowning in his own pericardial space, and nobody was coming to help him, and the only person in the hospital who understood what that meant was the nurse they'd already decided to fire. His oxygen saturation was 82 and dropping. The monitor screamed its warning in the darkness of room 347, and Laura Bennett heard it from 3 corridors away. She moved without thinking, her body already in motion before her mind caught up, muscle memory that had nothing to do with nursing school and everything to do with the field hospital in Tikrit where she'd learned that hesitation costs lives. The code button. She hit it once. Silence. She hit it again, holding it down for a full 3 seconds, watching Captain Marcus Hayes's lips turn the color of bruised plums. His chest wasn't rising enough. His skin had the waxy, translucent quality that meant his heart was drowning in its own sac, blood pooling in the pericardial space like fluid in a bucket that had no drain. Cardiac tamponade. A slow suffocation from the inside out. The intercom crackled. Nothing. No voice. No footsteps. The nearest on-call resident was 12 minutes away in the surgical wing, buried in a trauma case that took priority. The nearest attending physician was off duty. She'd checked the call list at 01 for 5 hours, a habit from her days of running surgical rotations in forward operating bases, always knowing where her people were, always knowing who was available if catastrophe came knocking. Catastrophe had knocked at 0203 hours. Captain Hayes's fingers were fumbling with something in his left hand, the hand that wasn't connected to an fall line, the hand that still had dexterity even after the IED had stolen his voice 5 years ago. The tarnished military challenge coin. Tikrit, 2009. The unit emblem worn smooth from 1,000 uncertain moments, passed from hand to hand through a deployment that had cost Laura Bennett her son's commanding officer his voice and her boy his life. But Hayes was here. Hayes was alive. And Hayes was looking at her with eyes that said he knew exactly who she was. Had always known. His eyes said he recognized the calluses on her hands, the particular way she moved through a room like she was reading tactical maps in the air around her, the exact precision of someone who'd held other people's blood together with nothing but training and rage. The monitor screamed again. 02 sat dropping. 80, 78. His lips were moving, trying to form words his throat would never release, the IED's parting gift, a voice stolen, a body left behind. But those eyes were screaming everything. They were screaming that his heart was surrounded by fluid that wouldn't drain, that every beat was compressing against the accumulated blood like a fist closing around his cardiac chambers, that he was suffocating from the inside out, and there were 20 doctors in this hospital and not a single one of them would help him because Dr. Caldwell had poisoned the well and marked him as a problem case and assigned him to a nurse they'd already decided to fire. Laura made the calculation in 1.3 seconds. The way her mind had always worked, instantaneous geometry of consequence and survival. Pericardiocentesis without a physician present violated every protocol in the hospital bylaws. It would shred her nursing license. It would end her career. It would blow her cover completely, expose her position as a naval intelligence operative embedded at Seattle General to investigate Caldwell's fraud network, before she'd gathered enough evidence to build the case that would take him down. The mission would die. Her assignment would collapse. Everything she'd endured in the past 8 days, the public humiliation, the systematic demolition of her professional reputation, the assassination of her credibility in front of 20 doctors who'd been told to doubt her competence, all of it would have been for nothing. Hayes's hand reached across the gap between them, the coin extended. His eyes didn't look away. His eyes said he understood. His eyes said he knew what she was, because he'd served alongside her son, had held her boy's hand when the medical evacuation bird couldn't land, had been seconds away when the blast came. His eyes said that some things mattered more than missions. Some things mattered more than cover. Some things mattered more than anything else in the world. Laura turned toward the supply cart with the fluid precision of apex predators, no hesitation, no moment of internal debate after the calculation was complete. She prepped the ultrasound machine with hands that no longer shook, hands that had learned steadiness under mortar fire, hands that had sutured arteries while shells whistled overhead. The transducer glided across Hayes's chest, confirming what the monitor was already screaming, 340 milliliters of blood-tinged fluid surrounding his heart, the pericardial sac distended like a water balloon 1 millimeter away from rupture. She didn't need permission. She didn't wait for authorization. She marked the spot, the 5th intercostal space at the mid-axillary line, and prepped the skin with chlorhexidine that smelled like copper and anesthesia. Her gloves snapped like gunshots in the darkness of the room as she pulled them on. "I've got you, Captain." Her voice was a tone she hadn't used since Tikrit, the voice that came when rank and authority and training crystallized into single-syllable certainty. Hayes's eyes closed. His hand found the coin again. He pressed it against his chest like a talisman, like proof that somebody remembered, that somebody understood, that somebody still saw Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hayes as something other than a mute veteran who belonged in a corner room under a diagnosis code that insurance companies could leverage for profit. The 18-gauge angiocath needle went in on the first attempt, angled toward the left shoulder, and the resistance as it penetrated the pericardium was unmistakable, a tissue signature her hands recognized before her mind registered it. Fluid. Blood-tinged, dark, ancient. She withdrew slowly and steadily, watching the syringe fill with the accumulated evidence of cardiac damage, 60 milliliters, 90 milliliters, 120 milliliters of pressure that had been compressing his heart into chaos. With each milliliter withdrawn, his pressure climbed. His color returned. The monitor's rhythm steadied from tachycardia into something that resembled a heartbeat again. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song overhead, indifferent to miracle work. Hayes's breathing deepened. His fingers unclenched from the coin. His eyes opened and found Laura's, and for a moment there was no hospital, no protocol violation, no career burning down around them. There was only the acknowledgement that passed between soldiers who understood what survival cost. At 0215 hours, the on-call resident finally appeared in the doorway, 2 other nurses trailing behind him like satellites pulled into orbit. He saw the procedure tray. He saw the ultrasound machine. He saw Laura standing with perfect posture, her documentation already completed, her notes already written in clinical precision that left no room for interpretation. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, alarm, accusation. But Hayes was breathing. Hayes was stabilized. The monitor showed sinus rhythm. The vitals had climbed back into something that resembled human physiology. "Who authorized this?" the resident asked, his voice still sharp with the shock of arriving at a fully completed emergency procedure. Laura handed him the chart. Her voice didn't waver. It was measured, professional, military, the voice of someone who'd already crossed the Rubicon and found solid ground on the other side. "I did. Cardiac tamponade. Pericardiocentesis under ultrasound guidance. 120 cubic centimeters withdrawal. Vital stabilized at 0209 hours. The resident looked at the documentation. Every detail was correct. Every measurement was documented. Every step was performed with the precision of someone who'd done this procedure before, probably many times, probably in places where there were no attending physicians and no time to wait for bureaucracy to catch up with crisis. He looked at Laura with something new in his expression, not doubt, but the beginning of a very different kind of uncertainty. By 0600 hours, Caldwell had been briefed. His voice when he called the floor was ice. By 0730, the hospital board had been notified of an unauthorized procedure performed by nursing staff without physician oversight. By 0845 hours, 3 investigators appeared in the employee lounge asking questions about Laura's nursing credentials and about a supposed disciplinary history from her original nursing school that had been fabricated 3 days earlier by someone using forged letterhead. By 0900 hours, the badge that Laura had been using to access the medication room, the supply closet, and the secure files where she'd been documenting Caldwell's fraud no longer opened anything at all. The magnetic stripe had been deactivated. Her access codes had been deleted from every system. Her employment status was officially suspended pending investigation. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. By 0800 hours, Caldwell had activated his entire network. The hospital board received calls within minutes, strategic, well-timed, each one carrying the same message. Unauthorized procedure. Gross violation of scope of practice. Patient safety risk. The voice on the other end of each call was measured, professional, lethal. He had spent 8 months building these relationships, making sure every administrator owed him something. A consulting contract here. A research grant there. Sponsorship for the cardiac wing renovation. The board chairman took his call at his desk before 0815. Laura Bennett performed an invasive procedure without physician oversight, Caldwell said, his tone carrying the weight of genuine concern. At 0203 this morning. Pericardiocentesis. On a patient she had no authorization to touch. I have the incident report here. 20 attending physicians were either unavailable or explicitly documented as refusing the case. He let that number hang. 20. An impossible number. A damning number. The chairman asked only one question: do we have documentation? Already filed, Caldwell replied. I'm forwarding the incident report now. By 08:30, investigators from the nursing board were making calls to Seattle Pacific University's School of Nursing. They asked about disciplinary issues in Laura's academic record. There were none, but the question itself, asked with official gravity, was enough to plant seeds of doubt. They asked if she had ever been flagged for scope of practice violations. No record. They asked if her instructors had ever expressed concern about her judgment. None had. But the investigators were thorough, and thorough investigators sound like hunters closing in. The narrative was already being written. A nurse with something to prove. A patient no one wanted. A procedure no one had authorized. By 09:30, Laura's badge had been deactivated in the hospital system. She didn't know yet. She was still in the break room on the night shift, charting with the careful precision she brought to everything, medication times logged to the minute, patient responses documented, vital sign trends noted in her own handwriting that looked like architecture. At 10:50, her shift supervisor pulled her aside. "You need to go to HR," the woman said quietly. "Right now. Bring your badge and your stethoscope." The walk through the main lobby happened at 1115 hours, the shift change. 50 staff members moving through the atrium. Nurses clocking out. Residents arriving for morning rounds. Attendings walking toward their offices. Security, 2 officers, professionally neutral, escorted Laura through the center of the lobby like a prisoner being walked through a yard. Badge in hand. Scrubs still on. No explanation offered to the watching faces. She moved with the same composure she had maintained during grand rounds, during Caldwell's public demolition, during every calculated humiliation. Her jaw was set. Her shoulders were squared. But inside her chest, something fundamental was breaking, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she had sacrificed her cover, her position, her entire operational security footprint, and it was being interpreted as incompetence instead of heroism. Someone whispered. Another staff member turned to watch. A resident she had trained stopped mid-step. The security officer's hands rested near their belts, not threatening, just present. Professional. A woman she had worked with for 3 years looked away. Not from disgust. From pity. The HR director had the termination letter already prepared. Laura could see it on the desk before she sat down, letterhead, official seal, her name at the top. The woman's expression was carefully constructed neutrality, the kind perfected by administrators who terminate people on a schedule. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately," she said, reading from the document as though Laura couldn't see the words herself. Citation, unauthorized invasive procedure. Gross violation of scope of practice. Patient safety protocol violation. Failure to obtain physician authorization. This constitutes grounds for immediate dismissal under Section 4.7 of the Nursing Staff Agreement. Laura signed the acknowledgement form. Her hand was steady. The pen moved across the paper with the same precision she had used to prep surgical kits under fire, the same control that had withdrawn 120 cubic centimeters of blood from a dying man's pericardium at 0203 hours. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She didn't mention that the patient she had saved without authorization was currently stable in ICU, that his heart rate was regular, that he was breathing without ventilator support. She turned in her badge. The woman at the desk scanned it and the access light turned red. Deactivated. She turned in her stethoscope, the Littman cardiology that she had owned for 9 years, used in 14 different units, carried through 3 combat deployments worth of muscle memory. The woman placed it in a folder with the label that said separating employee. Access cards. Employee identification. All of it went into that folder. The director slid a packet across the desk. Severance details. Health insurance continuation information. Information about how to file an appeal. There was a 3% chance an appeal would succeed. They both knew it. Caldwell watched from the second-floor administrative corridor. Arms crossed. Satisfied. She could feel his eyes on her as she was escorted back through the lobby toward the exit. She didn't look up. The composure held. Her face betrayed nothing even as the ground beneath her operational mission collapsed into dust. She drove home in silence. The rain started somewhere around the Coronado Bridge and didn't stop. It hammered the windshield like a judgment, like applause at a funeral. At 1,430 hours, exactly 48 hours after Captain Marcus Hayes had been first refused care by all 20 attending physicians, Laura Bennett sat at her kitchen table and finally let herself break. 8 months of evidence lay in folders in front of her. Phantom billing codes. Insurance claims marked as emergency procedures when they were elective. Kickback payments disguised as consulting fees. Medicorp insurance routing irregular payments through shell corporations. Caldwell's signature on documents that proved he had systematized fraud across an entire hospital system. All of it worthless now. All of it inadmissible. Her cover was blown. The investigation would collapse within 24 hours. Naval intelligence would extract her before dawn. Her handler was already preparing the paperwork. Caldwell would destroy records the moment he learned she was military. The entire operation would be for nothing. She sat with her hands flat on the table, palms down, feeling the grain of the wood against her scarred fingers, fingers that had held wounded soldiers, that had moved through procedures in the dark, that had been steady enough to save a man's life and not steady enough to save her own career. Rain streamed down the window. The house was silent except for the sound of water on glass. Her 10-year-old daughter Maya came home at 1,445 hours. School ended early. Dental appointments day. She dropped her backpack by the door and froze when she saw her mother at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon. In the dark. In the quiet. With tears running down her face. Maya was 9 going on 30, the way military kids had to be, the way kids who had lost half their family to deployments learned to read a room the moment they entered it. "Mommy, why are you home?" the girl asked, approaching slowly. "Are you sick?" Laura couldn't answer. She couldn't explain that the mute patient in room 347 was the Special Forces officer who had commanded the unit that lost her son. Couldn't explain that she had thrown herself over his body when the IED detonated, taking shrapnel through her left shoulder and collarbone, ending her field career while saving his. Couldn't explain that she was doing it again, sacrificing everything, her badge, her position, her livelihood, because some people are worth more than your cover. Couldn't explain that some missions require you to lose. Maya hugged her, confused and frightened in the way only children are when they see their parents break. "It's okay, Mommy. It's okay. Don't cry." But it wasn't okay. It wouldn't be okay. And in exactly 24 hours, everything would change again in ways Laura couldn't possibly prepare for. The silence in the kitchen was so complete you could hear the rain turning to hail outside, each pellet hitting glass like a warning. Her phone buzzed. A text from former colleagues. "I'm sorry. That was wrong. Caldwell's been wanting you gone for months." Maya's arms tightened around her mother's shoulders while Laura stared at nothing, waiting for the knock on the door that would come at dawn, waiting for the helicopter that would extract her from a life she had built so carefully, so completely, so perfectly that no one had ever known who she really was. The Sikorsky helicopter descended through San Diego's morning haze at 08 for 7 hours, rotor wash flattening the palm trees in the parking lot and rattling every window on the 4th floor of Seattle General like artillery fire. Laura heard it from her kitchen table 7 miles away. She didn't move. Maya looked up from her cereal, eyes wide, but said nothing. Children of military families recognize that sound the way other kids recognize ice cream trucks. The helicopter touched down. The rotors began their wind down, that distinctive whoop 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 slowing to individual beats, and somewhere in the hospital, phones began to ring. 2 Marines in dress blues, dress uniforms sharp enough to draw blood, walked through Seattle General's main entrance at 0851 hours. Not escorted. Not questioned. They moved with the terrifying fluid precision of men who had spent years turning doors into dust, moving with such absolute authority that the lobby parted like the Red Sea. Their covers were tucked under their left arms, their faces forward. One of them, a gunnery sergeant with a scar that split his left eyebrow like a lightning bolt, approached the security desk. His voice came out like a tank idling in a garage, not loud, but you felt it in your chest. "We're looking for Triton 6. The elderly security guard, a man named Martinez who had served on a guided missile destroyer for 22 years, looked up from his clipboard. His face went pale, the specific pale that comes from understanding, all at once, that something you didn't know was wrong had just gotten corrected in the most official possible way. He stood. His chair rolled backward and hit the wall with a soft thud. "That's Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett, son." His voice carried across the lobby, bouncing off the tile floor, reaching every waiting room, every nurse station, every staff member who had watched Laura Bennett escorted out 2 days earlier in tears, her badge already deactivated before her shoes touched the parking lot. You stand at attention when you say that name. The silence was absolute. The kind of silence that comes when 50 people suddenly understand they had been wrong about something fundamental. 2 residents who had mocked her at the vending machine froze mid-conversation. A physician assistant who had reviewed Caldwell's complaints against her closed her mouth. The security guard's words hung in the air like a physical force, not an accusation, not a question, but a statement of fact delivered with the weight of 2 decades of service. "That's not a nurse. That's a rank. That's command." The 3-star general was waiting in Caldwell's office on the 7th floor. Admiral Jonathan Pierce, Naval Intelligence, had the bearing of a man who had spent 41 years making impossible decisions and living with every one of them. He sat across from Caldwell, who had been retrieved from his house that morning by FBI agents asking polite questions about his personnel records and his billing practices. The Admiral opened a folder. Then another. Then a third. Laura Bennett. Born 1978. Naval Academy graduate, class of 99. Initial assignment, Naval Medical Corps, attached to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. 14 deployments. Tikrit, Iraq, 2004, 2006, 2008. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2009, 2011. 3 combat tours in the deadliest theater of operations during peak surge years. 3 Purple Hearts. 1 Navy Cross for Valor in ground combat, specifically for action during an IED detonation near Sanjin Valley on October 14, 2011. 12 wounded extracted under fire. 2 killed in action. 1 Special Forces officer saved by medical intervention beyond protocol, beyond training, beyond what any person should have been expected to do while taking shrapnel to both legs and her left shoulder. Current assignment, the Admiral said, Naval Intelligence Directorate, Embedded Hospital Surveillance, Medicare Fraud Investigation. 8-month operation. He looked at Caldwell over the edge of the file. "She was investigating you, Doctor." Captain Marcus Hayes sat in a hospital bed on the 6th floor, a young Navy corpsman beside him with a tablet computer. The corpsman was trained in adaptive communication, text-to-speech technology that turned keystrokes into words, because an IED had stolen Hayes' ability to speak but not his mind, not his memory, not his absolute clarity about what had happened on October 14, 2011. When the Marines brought the tablet into his room, Hayes' fingers moved across the screen with precision, each keystroke deliberate. The device's voice was synthetic, but the message was not. "Master Chief Bennett shielded my body with her own when the IED detonated. She took shrapnel that was meant for me. Took it in both legs, left shoulder, and along her ribs. She stayed in Tikrit for 6 more months despite classified medical recommendation for immediate evacuation. She completed her tour. She saved 43 lives during that deployment alone. She ended her field career so I could keep mine." 10 seconds of absolute silence followed. The corpsman, a 22-year-old petty officer first class, lowered the tablet. Captain Hayes reached out and gripped the young man's shoulder with his right hand, his good hand, the one that still obeyed him. His left hand, the hand that had been burned and shattered, stayed pressed against the tarnished challenge coin pinned to his hospital gown. Tikrit unit patch, worn smooth by 30 years of carrying it through fire. Two people had touched that coin. One had carried it into a medical field hospital in Iraq. One had carried it into a hospital in San Diego. The FBI agents arrived at Seattle General at 0923 hours. Three of them, moving with the specific authority of federal investigators executing a warrant. They had a folder. Inside were Dr. Caldwell's call logs, 237 calls to Medicorp Insurance Billing Department between January and August. Financial records showing wire transfers totaling $847,000 in consulting fees to a shell company with Caldwell's wife as signatory. Billing codes for procedures never performed, medications never prescribed, diagnostic tests run on patients who had been discharged 36 hours earlier. But the final piece was something Caldwell had done himself at 0300 that morning, alone in his home office, panicked by the news that Naval Intelligence was taking an interest in a mute Special Forces captain in his hospital. He had accessed the VA personnel database using credentials he'd stolen from a retiring physician 2 years earlier. He had altered Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett's service record. Changed her discharge status from honorable to medical discharge with prejudice. Deleted her decorations. Fabricated a disciplinary history spanning 5 fabricated incidents. Each keystroke was logged by VA cybersecurity. Each action was a federal crime, 18 felonies total, carrying sentencing guidelines of 20 years minimum. An FBI agent placed the warrant on Caldwell's kitchen table. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The perp walk happened at 1,447 hours, during the busiest shift change of the day. Caldwell was escorted through Seattle General's main lobby in restraints, his wrists locked in steel, his white coat already removed and bagged as evidence. Every staff member who had watched Laura Bennett escorted out 2 days earlier now watched Caldwell led through the same lobby. The elderly security guard, Martinez, held the door open. He didn't speak. But his face said everything that needed saying. The 2 residents who had mocked the dinosaur nurse at the vending machine stood motionless, watching their mentor walk past them in handcuffs. The chief medical officer's face went gray. News crews were already setting up outside, cameras catching the moment when a respected physician became a federal defendant. 1 week later, Laura stood in Seattle General's main conference room in full dress uniform. The first time any staff member had seen her this way. Her ribbons were visible, the specific decorations that should have been worn on dress occasions, the medals that told the story Caldwell had tried to erase. Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, Naval Intelligence Corps, wearing 3 Purple Hearts and a Navy Cross. Not the timid nurse who had filed his charts quietly. Not the woman who had accepted his public humiliation with locked jaw and steady hands. His superior officer. Captain Marcus Hayes stood beside her in service dress, his left hand raised in salute, the tarnished challenge coin pinned to his chest where his heart was. His text-to-speech device sat silent, he didn't need words for this moment. The gesture said everything. The hospital board issued a formal apology. The CEO offered her the position of head of nursing and naval liaison. Caldwell's suspension became termination. 3 other physicians were brought into the investigation. The FBI's case, built entirely on 8 months of documentation Laura had compiled while maintaining absolute cover, eventually unraveled a fraud network spanning 4 hospitals across California. 3 years later, Dr. Caldwell sold supplemental insurance policies from a folding table outside a strip mall in suburban Phoenix. His commission was 3%. Nobody recognized his name. Nobody asked about his medical license. He simply existed, forgotten, like a bad medical error that heals over time. Laura stood with Maya at her side during the full Navy Cross ceremony she'd previously refused. Hayes insisted on presenting it himself, his voice coming through the adaptive device with synthetic clarity but absolute weight. When he saluted her with his left hand, the challenge coin pressed against his heart like a heartbeat, her 10-year-old daughter finally understood why her mother had spent 8 months pretending to be ordinary. Some missions require heroes to hide. True class is what you do when the lights go out, Laura whispered, and handed the challenge coin to Hayes one final time, watching him press it against his scarred chest while somewhere in Phoenix, a folding table collapsed in the wind, selling insurance that nobody needed, to nobody who cared, from a man nobody remembered. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Research military healthcare transparency organizations. Support the advocates fighting insurance fraud in veteran care systems. These battles are won by people who stay vigilant when the cameras turn off. The real heroes are the ones you never see.